Sorry, Esther, to disturb you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's been on the ground tonight, but we always say it's quality, not quantity. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Great pleasure to introduce to our awareness night tonight David Powell, who is a certificate holder with the SMU. I have a great rapport. He probably hates me, but that's fine.
That's not true.
A great rapport with David for his understanding and his presentation, so we could think of nobody better to engage us all with this discussion. Don't forget, yes, by all means listen to what's being said, but yes, ask questions. For so long now we've just had this thing within our churches and centres, come in, sit down, listen, go home. And actually, we want to know the nuts and bolts. We want to understand the mechanics of all the different aspects of spiritualism. So tonight's topic is the evidential message. And are you all happy with when I say an evidential message? This is what we've become accustomed to saying, the role of a medium. When we say the word medium, we automatically assume somebody up here saying, I've got your mother here. A medium is that interface between the two worlds. So that mediumship can manifest in art, in creativity, in organisation, in healing, in whatever. Yeah, 92 years, we still haven't found it, but we don't give up hope. So yeah, we're looking at the role of the evidential medium. And actually the role of the message. What is that and part of our religion and philosophy and way of life of spiritualism? So after that humongous introduction, David,
Great.
Sir, hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, it is an absolute pleasure and a joy to be with you here this evening. And this is a bit of a novelty for me because I'm stood on a platform and I'm not wearing a suit, shirt and a tie. So I actually quite get used to being kind of dressed like this. Whether a Sunday congregation would is another matter. The subject area that Lawrence put to me is, as he's just said, is to look at the part that evidential communication takes place within spiritualism. That said, I'm fully anticipating that we will go off-piste. We will go off in all sorts of directions and tangents because I know with absolute certainty that you've come here this evening for one reason. And that's not because there's nothing on television or anything like that.
It's warm.
Yeah, it's nice and warm. But that one reason being is that you have a question or you have questions. Because if you knew all the answers, you wouldn't be here. If you knew what you wanted and needed to know, you wouldn't have come tonight. So on the basis that you have questions, I'm of course fully anticipating that during the course of the evening, you'll feel free to put those questions forward. And I know you'll be comfortable with that because I know the kind of people that you are. But just in case you're not comfortable, let me say, if there's not any questions, then we're going to turn the tables. Because I've been studying mediumship now for 23, 24 years, and I've got more questions now than what I had when I started 20 odd years ago. So, as Lawrence said, this is not going to be about me talking at you for the next hour or so. I'd hope that we can have a discussion. By all means, I will kind of lead it off in a direction, but I'd be very happy that as we're going through the material, if there's anything that is either not clear or you want to offer an alternative view or to question something, then fire away. Okay? And I think that way we'll have a really productive evening. The other thing I would say, of course, is I'm not the font of all knowledge, but we've got Lawrence here with me, so between the two of us and our dear friends upstairs, as it were, then there should be, answers to most questions. The only things that we can't cover are predictions of tall, dark, handsome strangers and the winning numbers for next week's lottery. Okay, so sorry to disappoint you on that score.
Oh well, thanks for coming, everybody.
We'll just go now, okay? All right. So, evidential communication. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, what I'd like to do is just kind of set a scene and to give a context to what we understand as evidential communication. We know, of course, that there's been communication between this world and what we call the spirit world throughout the history of humanity. For as long as there have been humans, there has been communication between the two realms. And if you look in any religious teaching, to my knowledge, there is one which does not advance the view, does not promote the idea that there is something beyond this life, that there is a continuation, there is a new phase of living. But spiritualism is, I believe and I understand, uniquely different in that all other religions ask you to take it on faith, that when we die, there is a resurrection or there is a new phase of living. Spiritualism, though, says that, but then also demonstrates it. And for as long as there has been spiritualism in whatever form we may choose to describe or label it, there has been communication. Modern spiritualism, as we may or may not know, is regarded as starting in the mid-1800s, 1848 to be precise, in Hydesville in New York State in America. And whether people are familiar, I'll just give you a kind of a refresh. There were some sisters, young sisters, called the Fox Sisters. And they discovered they had rappings, knocking noises coming from inside their house. And they were naturally curious about this. And with a bit of practice, they were able to establish a code, like 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. And they held an intelligent communication with this unseen spirit. And what they subsequently discovered was that the identity of this unseen communicator had been a peddler, a travelling salesman. And he gave information that he'd been murdered by the previous occupant of the house, and his remains were buried in the cellar. Now you can imagine these were relatively young sisters, so what did they go and do? They got their shovels out and went and dug up the cellar. And what did they find? They come across the remains and trinkets and bits and pieces. And that was the, if you like, the launch point, what's regarded as the beginning of modern spiritualism. And I say that was 31st of March, 1848 in Hydesville, USA. The very first spiritualist church in the UK opened 1852 in Yorkshire, so not that many years thereafter. And since 1852, pretty much every week since then, and throughout all the periods of wartime and what have you, there have been demonstrations of mediumship, both public demonstrations and, of course, communications taking place in private homes and one-to-one sittings. So we've had this relatively recent, in the scheme of things, continuous period of time where there has been communication from the so-called dead to the living. And what I will say at this point is that communication with the dead is impossible. Do I need to say that again? Communication with the dead is impossible. Are you all a bit confused now?
Yeah.
Well, I've been practicing mediumship publicly for the last 13 years, and I have yet to communicate with a dead person. I communicate with lots of living people, but none of them are dead. They're very much alive. They are simply in another dimension, continuing to live in a different form. They're not dead. Their bodies that they had, by all means, may be dead, but they're not dead. So we have had this huge history of communication between the two worlds. You might ask yourself, why is it then, with that history of communication that's taken place, why is it that we as spiritualists, as this small group of people here this evening, are the minority view? Why isn't it accepted throughout all of humanity that death is simply a doorway, is a transition point, and life is eternal? Let's just pause at that point. Does anybody have a view on that? Why is it that we remain a small minority who have this belief, who have this knowledge, who have this understanding?
Well, other religions deny it, and they're in the majority. I mean, I've said before that with spiritualism, it's the only religion that never says don't.
Very true. Yeah.
You could go to a Catholic church.
Yeah.
You must do this, do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do as you like.
Yeah. You could say there is perhaps still very strong vested interests in maintaining the status quo.
Yes.
Yeah, all sorts of reasons why the status quo may be the preferred outcome. It's also worth noting that within the history of mediumship, Emma Hardinge Britten, who was one of the great pioneers of modern spiritualism, she gave a prediction, and that prediction was that if spiritualism didn't change humanity within the first 100 years, it wouldn't. Now, clearly, we've gone beyond that 100 years, and it certainly has made changes, and significant changes. But the understanding that we have and we share is not a universal view. So, although I have great faith and belief in the words and the conviction of Emma Hardinge Britten, it falls to us as the new pioneers to be part of that movement, to demonstrate that reality that life is indeed continuous. But perhaps one of the reasons, going back to that question about why is it that communication with the so-called dead is seen as something on a par with, fairies and goblins and all that kind of stuff, is that we could say that there are predominantly two modes of perception. There are two ways of regarding life. On one hand, you have the traditional materialistic mindset, if you like, and I prepared a little handout which I'll pass around and you're welcome to kind of take, and for the benefit of those people who are kind of reading on watching online, could you just take one and pass one around, please? We'll just kind of highlight these two perspectives. So I've called one the traditional materialistic, and I'd suggest to you that most of the population throughout planet Earth kind of fall within this first mindset, and this is what I call traditional materialistic. So the first point, at this point David will get his glasses on. Okay, so these are the consequences and implications of the traditional materialistic model mindset. consciousness arises from matter, i.e. the brain. If the brain is dead, there can be no consciousness. You and I and everyone else on planet Earth are separate beings. We are separate from other living organisms and therefore separate from nature. My thoughts are my own and rise and only exist within the confines of my mind. Communication between the living and dead is impossible, as the dead do not have brains and therefore do not have consciousness. Events such as near-death experiences, past life memories, déjà vu, ESP, synchronistic experiences are at best wishful thinking and do not conform to scientific understanding. War, conflict, poverty is an inevitable occurrence given the separate nature of humanity by nation, religion, belief, race, colour and gender. Creation and all known life is an evolutionary product of chance. Life has no ultimate purpose beyond the physical and material needs of the body. My life started at the moment of conception and will end with my last breath. God cannot be proven by science and therefore does not exist. That kind of model is what I'd suggest is the predominant view across a large section of humanity, and we are all kind of privileged and I would say blessed not to be within that camp. We may well have been at some point, but at some point along your journey of life you have realised that there is another perspective, there is another possibility. And just by way of illustration, I'd like to kind of illustrate what that model is. And this is where David does a little magic trick, kind of, okay? So the question is, how do we make the invisible visible? How do we make the invisible visible?
Throw a sheet over it.
Well, we're getting close, we're getting warm. Can we all agree there's air in this room? Yeah? Well, if there wasn't...
breathing.
Yeah, absolutely, we're still breathing. Because if there wasn't any air, we would soon be in the spirit world. So we can all agree there's air in this room. Can you see the air? No. We only know there's air in this room because we're still breathing. We can't see it, we can't touch it as such, we can't feel it, we can't really smell it unless it becomes polluted in some way, but we all know there's air in this room. So if we go back to that question, how do we make the invisible visible? Well, this is how we do it. We've now made the invisible visible. We can all agree, can't we now? You can see, not necessarily the air, but we can see the envelope. We can see the boundary that this air is contained within. And we know that the air hasn't gone anywhere. It was here to begin with. It's now in this physical form, and if I let this balloon go, which I'll do so very carefully because we don't want this flying around the room, if I let that go, where's the air now? Still here, isn't it? So the air was here to begin with, it came into a physical form, and it's still here now, but it's not in a physical form. Now change the word air with spirit. And that is the alternative model. Spirit was here to begin with. You were here to begin with. At some point you became manifest within a physical envelope, i.e. your body, and at some point in time you will let go of that body. So you've never left the spirit world. You are in the spirit world here and now, and you don't have to go anywhere to get to the spirit world. It's just that we're in a physical form at the present time. And that fundamentally is the alternative model. And let's just quickly run through again, for the benefit of those people who are watching online, what that alternative model looks like. And the key point, the first point, is that matter arises from consciousness, not the other way round. So matter arises from consciousness. Consciousness exists independently of the brain. Every human being is connected in the same way that every wave on the ocean is connected. Everything is a manifestation of consciousness. My thoughts have power, potency. They colour and influence not only my body and mind, but all beyond. Communication is natural and inevitable between consciousness of the so-called dead and living. Scientific understanding will never explain NDEs and the like, for as long as it is wedded to the belief that consciousness arises from matter. War, conflict and poverty is a choice made through ignorance. When the oneness of all life is understood, it will end. Creation and all known and unknown life is the product of intelligent design beyond the comprehension of the human mind. I have incarnated into this life not by chance, but through choice. Choice implies intention, and intention is directed to outcome. My physical body began its cycle of life from conception, but spirit is the defining intelligence behind it. I, as an eternal spiritual being, will continue to exist just as I existed before this physical life. Material science trying to explain the existence of God is like trying to measure sound with a magnifying glass. So we're all convinced, I'm sure, that we very firmly fit in that second model of perception. And we can see that when we look at life through that lens, that communication between the so-called living and the dead is as natural as the sun rising and the tides going in and the tides going out and birds singing. It's a natural occurrence, and yet it is still, because of the dominance of that first material model, regarded as something as being supernatural. As and when the vast majority of the population on planet Earth are in the same camp as us, then that's when we will see huge change taking place throughout the world. You've only got to think about healthcare, you've only got to think about education, to imagine how they will change when we can see and we can regard life through the lens as we do now. So having said all that, having set this picture where communication between the two worlds, between our loved ones, is a natural event, not a supernatural event, we ask ourselves, why does communication take place at all? Why do we hear from our friends and loved ones in the spirit world? Well, very simply, as I said, I've been demonstrating publicly for 13 years, and I'm sure Lawrence has probably been doing it a lot longer than me. The reason why we have communication in the first place is purely and simply for love. All communication is born out of love. I've not once, ever as a medium, experienced a communication from somebody who comes through and says, "You're a rotten so-and-so, you still owe me £5, or, I really don't like you." Sure, there can be somebody comes through who wishes to express a profound regret about something they may have said or they may have done, in effect looking for forgiveness. But that asking for forgiveness is an act of love. So there's the first point. All communication is driven by and through love. The more basic reason why we have communication is exactly the same reason why you have communication now between your friends and loved ones. If you're in the habit of phoning up a friend every now and again to say, "Hi, how you doing? What's going on in your life?" Or phoning your mum or your dad or your son or daughter or grandchildren, that natural desire to want to remain in touch doesn't end at that point of death. 5 minutes after we have passed to that higher life, we are the same person that we were. And we will be that same person for quite some considerable time, until we adapt and come into realization of our true nature. So those desires to want to be able to reach out and to communicate with our loved ones is a continuing expression of who we are. As above, so below. That's kind of how it works. And another way to kind of imagine this, let's just say for argument's sake, I'm going to say that we're all going to emigrate and we're going to go to some country, and everybody tells you that when you get to that country, there's no internet, there's no mobiles, you can't send postcards, you can't send letters, you can't do anything. Once you're there, you're there. It's like a one-way trip and the door closes behind you. And what happens when you get to this far off and distant land, and you get there and you find that's not the case? That you can actually speak to your loved ones, you can send postcards, you can let them know that you're there and you're well. What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to pick up the phone, aren't you? You're going to say to them, "Look, I've arrived. I'm safe, I'm well, everything is okay." So communication is born out of that human natural instinct to want to let our loved ones know that we're okay, that we're still thinking about them. And that is motivated purely and simply by love. So there is the kind of stimulus, there is the motivation for communication to take place. Now we know that for that communication to happen, not always, but usually it's through a medium. And what is a medium? Well, a medium is a regular person. There is nothing special, there is nothing highly evolved or spiritualized or anything about a medium. It is just another ordinary person. In exactly the same way as if I asked you all now to draw, if you've got some paper and pencils, and if I asked you to draw a picture of a cat, my picture of a cat would look like a 3-year-old's, because that's the extent of my artistic ability. But I'm quite sure some of you here, because you've got a natural flair for art, you could draw a picture that actually looked like a cat. In the same way, I'm not at all musical, but I bet some people here are. And I could have a lifetime of music lessons and still not be able to play Jingle Bells. Some of you here would pick it up in a matter of, days, weeks, whatever, because you have a natural affinity, a natural capacity to be able to be musical or artistic. And a medium just happens to have a natural tendency to be sensitive to the impressions from the spirit world. So that's the only difference between a medium and any other person. So we've established that communication is natural, that our loved ones and our friends in the spirit world want to communicate, they want to keep in touch. That is born out of love. We have a medium who is sensitive, who is disposed to receiving those thought impressions from the spirit world. So all we need to do then is we get the communicator, the medium, and the sitter, if I could use that expression. And all things being equal, we should then have a communication. If in this scenario here, if I'm the medium and Lawrence was the sitter, and somebody from the spirit world is wanting to communicate with Lawrence, they simply, their consciousness overlaps with my consciousness. Another word for that could be aura. They impress their thoughts on my consciousness of what they want to say. I interpret that, feel that, sense that, and express that to the sitter. And that is communication. And at that most basic level, that is a tick in the box, assuming that Lawrence the sitter can understand who the communicator is, what the evidence is to verify their identity, then that is a tick in the box, as it were, because we've established communication. And Lawrence was very clear, as I was right at the beginning, to say that we're going to explore evidential communication, and it's perhaps worth just taking a moment to make sure that we're all clear about what the difference is between evidential and maybe psychic communication. So when we talk about evidential communication, we are talking about that scenario that I've just kind of presented to you. Lawrence, if he's going to play the part of the sitter, I'm the medium. We've got a fictitious, I'm just going to make up some character here, so I'm not linking at the present time. So I'd be saying something to Lawrence like, I've got this gentleman here, he's round about 6 foot. I know he would have lost the top of one of his fingers through an accident at work. I know that this man would have had a heart attack before he passed to the world, passed the spirit world, and I know he's got a wonky right leg. And there could be other bits of information. So that is evidence about the identity of the communicator, and hopefully there'd be more about his personality and his attitude, and maybe a sense of humour and some names and anniversaries. And all being well, Lawrence would say, that sounds like Fred. Exactly to a T, that's Fred. So Lawrence would be happy to accept that Fred is here impressing his thoughts to me as the medium, which I then give. That is an evidential communication, because we're giving evidence on the identity of the communicator, and we are proving that life is continuous. Because how could I get that information if it wasn't coming from the discarnate character of Fred? The other form of communication is what we might call a psychic reading. And we have to kind of go back a little step here, but if we can accept that as a spiritual being, everybody and everything has an energy field around it, an emanation, an aura is the kind of word that we would use in spiritualist terms. And again, somebody who is sensitive to perceiving those impressions would be able to, and again, if I use Lawrence as an example, if I allow my awareness to, as it were, to overlap Lawrence's energy, his awareness field, a good psychic would be able to read the information that's there and would be able to tell Lawrence about all sorts of kind of things about his life, what he's done, his abilities, his potentials. But the key point is the information is about Lawrence, not about a third-party person from the spirit world. So evidential communication is very much about the first kind of model that we just kind of went through. So we've said that evidential communication is born out of love. It's a natural expression of wanting to be in touch. The medium, all being well, should be able to give information that verifies the identity of the communicator. And as I said, we could regard that as job done. But there's actually a lot more going on within that message. Let's just say, for argument's sake, in this communication, this fictitious communication I've just had with Lawrence as the medium, and I've given information from this fictitious character called Fred. Let's just say Fred had borrowed some of Lawrence's tools and forgot to give them back. So Fred is wanting to express his profound regret. Lawrence understands that and accepts that. We could say that is the message, but the message goes on, should go on, at a much deeper, more profound level. Because if, and we'll, again, let's just imagine that Lawrence has come in for the first time and he's had a communication from Fred, and that's his first experience of communication, his first demonstration that life is indeed eternal. One of two things could really happen. Lawrence could walk away with that experience, having forgiven Fred, and carry on with his life as if nothing had ever happened. Carrying on in a material kind of mindset, believing that this life is finite and there will be that point called death. And that's when it all ends. But what should ideally be happening is Lawrence goes away from that experience and thinks, well, crikey, how's that just happened? Because I thought Fred was dead. So if he's not dead, how is he still alive? How has it been possible, when everybody says that when you're dead, you're dead, how has it been possible for Fred to communicate with me? That might lead on to another question, like, well, if Fred is still alive, does that mean that I will still be alive when I'm dead? There will be another question. Well, did my life, if I'm eternal, if I can't really die, did my life actually start when I was conceived, or is it possible that I was alive in some other capacity? There could be another question. Well, if I'm eternal, what is then the purpose of this life? And we can begin to see, I hope, that as we ask that first question, it should prompt another question, and another question, and another question, and another question. And those questions are a bit like peeling the onion. We begin to turn our attention away from all the kind of distractions of the busy physical materialistic life and mindset, and begin to turn our attention inwards and ask those questions of ourselves. Because we want to understand, we want to have a framework which makes sense to us. And that process of, as it were, turning our attention inwards, of asking ourselves those questions, takes us on a journey, if you like, of discovery, of realization, of unfoldment. And what it's essentially doing is moving us ever closer to the true and the full realization of who and what we are. Because I know that at this point in time, you might not regard yourself as a spiritual being. You may not believe that you are eternal. Because when you look in the mirror, you don't see an eternal spiritual being. I certainly don't. See that I've got a bit greyer and a bit heavier and all the rest of it. But through that process of asking those questions, we begin to sort of push the boundaries back of our awareness, of our understanding. And in that process, we are inviting the spirit world and those who are drawn to us to help us in our understanding. And we cannot then help but grow. We grow individually, we grow in terms of our intellect, we grow in terms of our compassion, because we begin to see the oneness of all life. We begin to see that our place within nature. We begin to see the connections that are there, but that we don't see from that materialistic mindset. So, evidential communication, there's two parts of it. There is the simple part, if you like. I'm here, I love you, I'm fine, we'll be together again one day. But the subliminal message, the kind of seed that is sown within that simple message, is an invitation. It's a beckoning for individuals to come into a fuller realization, to come into an alignment with truth. That we are going through this life in varying degrees, caught up in that materialistic mindset, but that's not really how it is. And in that degree to which we are able to move ourselves to be more fully aligned with that other mindset, then we begin to realize our capabilities, our potentials, and we come here and we more fully do what we chose to do, which was to come into this life, not by accident, but with an intention and a clear purpose. And each and every one of us will have our own purpose, will have our own reason for being here. And unlike other religions, there is nobody saying, so I forget your name? Ted. There's nobody here saying, don't do this or you've got to do that. Spiritualism allows us to find our own way. It allows us to make our own decisions, born out of our own experience. And that's the option, that's the choice that we really have in this life. We can continue to skate along the surface with that materialistic kind of mindset, or we can heed the message, as it were, and allow that to be like a key going into a lock that opens up a doorway into our own understanding and our own growth, and will serve us not only on this earthly journey, but in that continuing journey when that time comes, as it will for each and every one of us. I know we're not doing mediumship tonight as such, but here's a message for everybody. We're all going to die. Okay? No one gets out of this alive, as it were. We're all going to die. And the sooner that we can get our head round that And the sooner that we can be okay with that, then the happier we'll be. Because that is the final little string, as it were, to the bow of evidential communication. If it does not remove fear, I would say it's failed. You could have 100 messages of the highest quality, but if that message does not remove the fear of death from you, then it's not so much the message has failed, but you've failed to realise the significance of it. And that comes down to ourselves, and it's that choice that we have, that opportunity that we have to decide how we're going to live this life. So I'm going to pause there because I've been speaking for far too long, and I know there's a question there that you'd like to ask. Yeah, please.
Is there a danger in that? Is that a lot of people who agree come into spiritualist churches. So if you describe the next life as something that is nothing to fear, it might be more comforting than the life down here. Could those believe people in some way give up on what they have in their own life here?
Clearly, the messaging, how that information is packaged, if I could use that expression, needs to be with sensitivity. It needs to be handled with care. People need to be handled with care. But I think just the kind of opposite is true. People need to kind of wake up to the opportunity, the fullness that this life affords, because in my perception, in my experience, so many people are going through this life almost in a coma kind of state. Their awareness is so closed down, is so restricted, is so narrow, that when that time comes to find themselves on the other side of the spirit, they'll kind of wake up realizing, oh my goodness, that life has gone and I didn't really live it. They spend most of their life fearing death, and in the process don't live life.
But I'm talking about the immediately bereaved who might even be tempted to go over and join people they've lost because you're depicting it in some way as sort of an immediate continuation where you are up there just as you are down here.
Yeah.
What do you do to sort of avoid the danger of not encouraging a bereaved person to sort of give up on their own life, but what do you do to be aware that that could be a possibility? If you depict that second life as too...
Yeah. I believe, we've got to be, as mediums, as interpreters of our own experience and what is given from the spirit world, we have to be honest. Of course, none of us, anybody who stands on this platform, can give their picture, their impression of how it will be and what it is like. But until we find ourselves there, that will be the absolute proof. But in my experience, as I said, everything that I've experienced of the spirit world, from communication and any other manner of experiences, has been motivated and has been through love. And there's nothing in that experience that suggests to me that future experience won't be anything like, won't be dissimilar to that. I think we do have to give that message to people in those circumstances who are bereaved, that their loved ones will be fine. There will be that time for reunion. That will happen, but they have their life here and now to lead and to fulfill all the obligations and all the opportunities that this life affords. And when we are able to kind of make that shift in our perception away from that materialistic mindset to the second model, then we know, we don't hope and we don't believe, we know that time will come. when we'll be together again. So for me as a medium, and I've been in that situation, it's dealing with that person in that situation with care, with sensitivity, and wanting to give reassurance, I guess. That's what all we can do, to give reassurance that their loved ones are well, are fine, will want their loved ones who remain here on the earth plane to be happy, to be fulfilled in their life, but to know with absolute conviction that there will be that day when they're together again. Sorry? Mediumship is a huge undertaking. It is a huge responsibility. And I'm very conscious of that every time, and I'm sure any self-respecting, sincere medium is. Every time they open their mouths from a platform to say something, that has the potential to change a person's life, hopefully for the better. Not by way of reassurance and not by way of boasting. I did have an actual experience in a church where I gave a communication to somebody. They became upset, which is not unusual during a communication because of the sensitivities of it.
Happens to a lot of your sisters.
Sorry?
Happens to a lot of your sisters.
It does, yeah. And at the end of the service, I went home thinking that was just a regular kind of service. And a few days later, I had an email from the president of the church, who went on to say that person had come into that service that day in a very distressed state, and the communication that she received was sufficient to completely 180-degree change her mindset and her direction. So that's the kind of impact that mediumship, evidential mediumship, can have. And as I said, it's never something to be kind of lightly entertained. Yeah.
Can I chime in on
Please,
that?
yeah.
You're saying there, Anne, about somebody who's bereaved, it may be enough to send them over the edge. If you have proven that continuity of life, that will remove the bereavement process. The bereavement is, I feel like I've lost somebody. In and through the evidential messages, that knowledge that no, I've not lost them, they are there. So then that initial pain, this is part and parcel, and love is what we operate in.
Yeah.
Also in healing. Every message is a healing energy.
You just don't want them to choose to go over.
Yeah, but if you're saying that because of the bereavement and then accepting that the life is continual, that the bereavement is still going to drive them over, how can it when they've accepted that life is continual? Because they wouldn't think of that step about taking themselves off if it were not driven by the grief and bereavement process. And the evidential message, don't forget, is one little slice of the pie of spiritualism. If anything, talking to the alleged dead puts more value on this life. Understanding that we are here for a purpose, we are here for something. It makes a greater value of this life. I mean, because if you remove that fear of death, how valuable is life? Well, I'm sorry, that's a mindset. That's a mindset. If you take away that fear of death, that means, wow, this life, I've got to live it. I'm not going to sit here worrying about...
Somebody else, that might be...
Somebody else can be anything, can it not? So it's a bit of a narrow question, but as I say, the initial fundamental answer is you're postulating that the bereavement process will drive somebody into taking that step. because they've had the evidence that life is continual. So actually you've got two conflicting things going on there, because if you have proven life goes on, what place does the bereavement then have?
It's just that some people come into these churches completely bereaved. That's why they come in the first place. So how do you know whether your message is exactly what state they're in, apart from when the...
Because we work with the intelligence of spirit, and that's not a cop-out. We say things and thinking, what the hell am I saying that?
Yeah.
How the hell am I saying that? A message to me is an invitation from the spirit world. Come and find out more. Not come and join us. It's not a rally call.
And I think
find
it's
out more.
I think it's probably true in the vast majority of cases that everybody who walks in that door for the first time is in some way in some great need. It may have been through a bereavement. There could be other things going on in that person's life, and coming in through those doors could be almost like a last resort option. Yeah. But as I said, as Lawrence was saying, the intelligence of the spirit knows what kind of needs to be said, and hopefully in providing the medium is able to relay that, that should go some way to say removing that sense of wanting to do something very drastic. Yeah. Thank you. More questions then. I know you've got questions. You've been soaking all that up. I've been seeing heads nodding. Yeah, please.
Is there anything like someone who dies when they shouldn't have died, by mistake, like an accident or something? Does that happen, or is it all meant to be?
Well, I would say there certainly are differing views about whether it's possible to die before your time.
Yeah.
There is one kind of extreme school of thought that says, you come into this life when, the day you kind of go is known, and nothing's going to change that. That's kind of one extreme view. At the other end of the scale, I do believe personally that we come into this life and we may have a broad set of learning lessons, things that we want to experience, and we've got free will, we've got choices, and if we choose possibly in a reckless way, that could endanger this physical life. And of course we're not immune from the actions of other people who may act in a way. So is it possible to go before your time? I would have to say I can't say with absolute conviction, but I believe it is possible. One thing is for certain in my mind that anybody who is seen to sort of pass before their time, or compared to somebody who's lived 90 odd years, their experience will be not different. That they will be met at that point of when they are dying in the physical sense, and given what help and assistance is needed to come to terms with what's happened. I know there are various things I've seen and read about people being lost, as it were, in the spirit world and in need of rescuing and helping and guided. I'm sorry, but in my book, in my understanding, that's nonsense. The spirit world know what they're doing. There's an intelligence there. When we pass, it is a natural event in exactly the same way as birth is a natural event. There's nothing supernatural about it. And will be helped and will be assisted to come into that realization of what has happened.
Can I jump in?
Please, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, you will get fed up with
Yeah,
me.
no,
please.
no, go for it. No.
My understanding, my way that I visualise and think about life, when you talk about going before your time, you understand the theory of the life plan. So we've got a goal in our life. You know, there's certain things we're going to experience or tackle or come up against or resolve. I think of our life plan as a tree, so it's a three-dimensional model. And you can spend your whole life going up and down different branches, but each end of that branch is a different time of returning to the spirit world. So it's depending on which pathway you go along. You know, and that's my way. I can visualize, and I like simple things, but I can visualize that because, all right, I smoke. We know smoking is not conducive to a long and healthy life. I can stop smoking tomorrow, or I can continue smoking. That is free will. So, you know, each decision we make is putting us on different branches and different pathways, and there's nothing to say coming back down a branch and exploring another avenue. You know, we all have the epiphany moments when we've just given up on life, and then suddenly we change direction and the sun comes out again. So we've just gone up another branch. So going before your time, how do you define what your time is? You know, your time is part and parcel of all the decisions and lifestyle choices that you make will have an effect on that passing time. And that again comes back down to free will. So I'm going to give up smoking, take up jogging, and then drop down dead with a heart attack.
Yeah, please.
You do think that you choose what things are going to happen to you before you come. You do think that. You make a plan, that there's a chart that you follow that says, right, I'm going to live to a certain age, and in that time, this is going to happen to me, and that's going to happen to me.
No, I don't believe it's that kind of detailed, it's that specific. Let's just imagine a scenario, okay? Let's just say that you and I are in the spirit world now, okay? And you are my guide and you are my mentor, okay? And I'm reflecting back on my most recent life experience. And I say to you, or you remind me, that one of my kind of chosen areas that I wanted to work on was forgiveness, as an example. And I may have had experiences in this lifetime where I kind of may have been close to kind of learning the lesson of forgiveness, but not fully. So you would say to me, well, look, David, if we look at you as a whole spiritual being, we can see that you have particular attributes in these areas. We'll call them gold stars, if you like, for lack of better expression. So you've got kind of gold stars in this area, but in this particular aspect, you're still on a bronze or whatever, okay? This is where you need to kind of focus your attention. So as a spiritual being, I say, okay, fine, I'm happy to reincarnate into another life experience, and my main purpose in that life is to experience, to be able to have the opportunity to master forgiveness. So I don't believe that the specific circumstances and details as such are kind of mapped out in finite detail. But I come into that life with that being my purpose, and life will respond to that purpose. So situations, people, there'll be opportunities in that life for me to be able to experience the need to forgive and hopefully to master that lesson.
Because you won't have remembered.
No, not on a conscious level,
No.
but on a deep kind of spiritual level. Of course, it's all there, it's imprinted. And that goes back to what I was saying about the profound importance and significance of the message of communication. Because once we've had that initial demonstration, that initial proof that life is continuous, that then should prompt ourselves to be asking questions. And in the degree to which we ask those questions and start exploring ourselves, then we become more in tune with ourselves as a spiritual being, with our purpose, about realising our potentials. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, no, I don't believe it's kind of finite details, but we come in with a general purpose and life responds to that. And as Lawrence was saying, we've got choices. We could go through this life and we could have countless opportunities to forgive and choose not to. Find ourselves back in the spirit world at some future date, and you as my guide saying, David, what on earth were you thinking? You had this opportunity time and time again, and what did you do with it? So I'd say, okay, well, I'll go back another time, we'll have another go, and let's hope this time that we kind of get it right. And, joking aside, very light-hearted way of putting that across, that's how I believe it is. That we have, we've lived thousands of lives, we've had countless lives, because if we're eternal spiritual beings, what is eternity? Surely eternity just can't be going forward from this point in time. Eternity must mean, without beginning and without end. So if we've lived countless lives beforehand and we'll have countless lives to come, we'll have a constant opportunity for evolution and for growth. Which makes perfect sense when we look at life from our model. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If you look at all of this through a materialist mindset, it's all mumbo jumbo. It's flights of fancy, wishful thinking and imagination. And I understand, I get that, but I'm not looking at life and I'm not experiencing it from a materialist perspective. Is there another question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please.
Slightly different track.
Yeah.
Just you yourself as a medium. When did this come to you that these impressions that are really interested in how you describe having these impressions?
Yeah.
And that's the message.
Okay.
So that's just like an impressed thought on your brain. When did that first happen to you? When did you know that was something from another realm and that those messages were meant for somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it something you just had an inkling about and you then explored and then you learned what it was? How did it all come about?
Okay. In a nutshell, I grew up in a spiritualist family. My grandmother was a medium all her life, and I used to go and watch my uncle do trance mediumship on a Saturday afternoon. And so seeing that and being immersed in that kind of understanding was part of my childhood, in exactly the same way as going to the park on a Sunday and playing football. It wasn't anything abnormal. So it's always been there, as it were, in my understanding. But it wasn't until I got to the age of 40, and literally as I turned 40, it was though someone flicked a switch in me. And I became, from being a very passive person of understanding about life after death and spiritualism in a very general sense, it was like I became a junkie overnight, and I had to find out about this, I had to experience it. And how it first started for me was, I love music. I just love listening to music, and I did when I was in my 40s. And I would put music on, just crash out on the settee and listen to music. And as I used to do that, I used to find I would start to feel funny sensations on my face. There's almost like sometimes there were like cobwebs or just a peculiar feeling around my face. And that was the first inclination, and I didn't know what was going on at first. I just had these sensations, and then it started to develop, and I just want to write. And I'd start writing little bits of inspired writing or little bits of poetry and philosophy. And I've said this before in addresses, but the David you see stood before you now is nothing like David when I was 40. Two completely different beings and characters almost. And the David in his 40s was not somebody who wrote poetry and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So that was really kind of weird for me to have this impulse to write stuff. And what was being expressed through me was of a spiritual kind of nature. Now, my mum being a spiritualist, lifelong spiritualist, she spoke to an established medium and said, son's experiencing all these things, what's going on? And he said, it's just a spirit. They're just wanting to get his attention. So that was the start for me. And I can tell you with hand on heart, I had no desire, no interest, no ambition, did not want to be a medium. And the simple reason why I did not want to be a medium, because back in my 40s, I had an absolutely crippling fear of public speaking. The idea of being a medium would be my picture of living hell. To be stood up in front of 30 or 40 people, relying on an invisible power that you can't see and can't touch, and communicating with individuals. So there was no way on earth that, despite being brought up as a spiritualist, despite having that understanding, despite those impressions, that I was going to get myself up here and be a medium. It wasn't going to happen. My interest was very much around healing, because you can just be very passive and you don't have to stand up in front of people, and trance. And that it fascinated me, because I suppose, having seen my uncle and experienced that as a child, there was this deep fascination there with me. And it was through that process from my 40s onwards of learning, of discovery, of experimentation, of going to circles, of going to workshops and all that kind of thing. And I was doing that for the best part of 10 years before I got up on a platform. So that was my kind of apprenticeship, and I trained as a healer to begin with. And as I look back, I can see the spirit world very carefully, but very cleverly, led me on a little pathway that got me out of my comfort zone and led me to this place where I'm stood here now talking to you. And through a process of desensitizing, allowed me to be able to stand here today and talk to you. But the experiences from those early days had such a profound impact on me and an effect that I could not dismiss them. I could not come up with any alternative explanation. And forgive me, I've said this before and I'll just mention it quickly because I know you won't have heard this. On one of those times when I had this impulse to write, I wrote in German, a language that I don't know, never studied, and the words that were written, spelling wasn't perfect, but what I'd written in German, a language I don't know, was "Step with me through the looking glass." And when you have an experience like that, that grabs you. You can't write that off. You can't dismiss that. You can't find an alternative explanation other than there's an intelligence here that is communicating me and is extending an invitation. So what did I do? You can't turn down that kind of invitation. But for me, it's been a progressive journey of discovering and of realising. And as I said, to begin with not resistance, but as I said, I never wanted to be here. So I've had to be convinced, but the experiences have convinced me, and writing in German was just one of many that I've been privileged to have and have left me in no doubt whatsoever about the reality of the spirit world, of the intelligence, and everything to do with it.
Okay, so it's basically through experience, which is what I was wondering if it was this big epiphany or something you already knew as a child.
No,
But no, it's quite interesting that it sort of grew and developed
absolutely.
over a period of 10 years.
Yeah,
So it's through education and learning and probably understanding what was maybe already there,
yeah.
but you just didn't know it, perhaps.
Yeah. I do believe that we come into this, because I've often asked myself, you know, why in my 20s didn't I start exploring this? Why didn't I do it then? And I don't think I was meant to. I don't think I was intellectually or whichever way you want to describe it, capable of dealing with it. And perhaps I wasn't meant to.
Yeah.
And, you know, lots of people I see, they kind of come into this at the right time. You know, I've got nieces who are in their teens and they're desperately interested and keen about this. But I'm kind of almost pushing them away a little bit. Not saying them don't do it, but they're interested. But, you know, we have a duty, have a responsibility to this life first and foremost. You know, we've got to experience life, and in my estimation, those mediums who are long-standing and in my kind of view and estimation have the credibility are those people who have been through life, have life experiences, because how can you talk to somebody about bereavement if you haven't experienced bereavement yourself? How can you relate? How can you have empathy with an experience that you haven't had? So life experience, I believe, is important as a medium. And maybe if I'd, you know, pursued mediumship in my 20s, it would have been because I wanted to, rather than Spirit saying, now's the time. Okay.
Interesting there. David had that experience, not brought to him via a medium. That was his own awareness, his own communication, personal to him, direct from Spirit. Within spiritualism, we are seeing the last 20, 30 years, the emphasis has become the evidential message, and thereby raising the status of evidential mediums as being the stars of the show, and then the drive therein of saying, well, I want to be like, you know, but people say to me, oh, I'd love to be a platform medium, and think, right, well, there's 52 Sundays in a year, you can kiss goodbye to 48 of them.
Yeah.
How does that grab you? How does that feel, you know? But we have been, and when I say we, I'm talking about the movement and everybody within it, been promoting the evidential medium as being the sort of like pinnacle and creating this illusion. You know, when we see all the workshops, all the courses designed to improve your evidential mediumship. The last awareness night, we were talking about circles, and I've done some rough figures on population of mediums v general population, and it's like one person in 100,000 people would actually progress to become a platform evidential medium. But what Spirit want, what Spirit are pushing us to do, is just to increase our own awareness so we can experience moments like David had for ourselves. Because I tell you, I've had messages, I've had readings, etc., 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 but the most powerful, the most poignant and the most meaningful communications are the ones that I have had myself. You know, I can never, they're there. Just think about them, they're there, they're so strong. So, you know, with the evidential message, yes, we can demonstrate what we talk about, but one of the greater messages from the spirit world is be your own medium. And we don't mean a medium as in needing somebody else's validation, because we do tend to chase that a lot. We're lucky as evidential mediums, we get immediate validation, we get a yes or a no. Our healing mediums don't get that, because they will continue to just give healing, you know, and they're not getting that instant validation thing. And we do spend a lot of time looking for that validation. But as I say, trust me, if you expand your awareness enough to, and what David was just relaying is there for everybody. I'm not going to say we're all going to get a message in German, but that depth of communication, just knowing that somebody is there. Do you know what? That's what the spirit world wants. When we talk about making it, you know, making us our own mediums, it's not to stand up here and get a round of applause or rotten tomatoes or the validation. It's just, you know what? Honestly, if people tape recorded me, I'd be in St. Anne's, I think, by now sometimes, because I can sit there and I'm in hysterics sometimes. I don't mean badly, I'm just hysterical laughter. Because a thought will go up and some of my lot will say something and I'll go, oh my God. But it's real. It is so real.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
How can I help my granddaughter? She was 5 when she first saw spirit. A couple of times she saw it. And about 18 months ago when my son died. So the granddaughter, she lives in France now. They're in a big old French house. And the first time I went to see them after my son died over here, she actually saw my son. And I know she did because of the way she was reacting. She was happy instead of crying like the rest of us. And she was so pleased and happy that she'd seen Uncle Steve and told me not to worry, that he was okay, and he was smiling and he was giving us all a hug. But now evidently I hear she's upset because she hasn't seen him since.
Yeah.
And I think, is it Steve not wanting to come forward and show himself, or I don't understand why she hasn't been able to see him since.
Yeah.
And I need to know how to comfort her and what to say to her, because her parents are not sympathetic.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know what I say to her, but whether if they were to hear me say what I say,
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd be that happy, because I can't just dismiss what she's seen.
No.
And I don't want to. I'd like to promote it.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
I recognise the difficulty with grandchildren. I've got a grandson myself, and you know there are boundaries that we have to kind of obviously respect in terms of what we say and what our views that we kind of might import. But leaving that to one side, and I guess only you can decide, you know, how you kind of manage that part of it. But in terms of how do we support a child in that situation, I think we just have to be as natural and as open and as matter of fact. And that's certainly how I've been with my grandson. I mean, I joke with him that he's my little Jedi apprentice. You know, he says, he calls me Gang Gang, and he says, Gang Gang, he said, you're the Jedi Master. And I said, yes, and you're my Jedi apprentice. But we kind of joke about it, but even at the age of 4, you know, we've had kind of conversations in that very matter-of-fact way. What we have to kind of recognise that almost inevitably as the children grow up, because of the influence of parents and school and all those other outside influences, that natural sensitivity will more than likely kind of contract. Not always. There are some children who, you know, retain that, and I can quote Eileen Davies, fantastic medium, as an example. She was seeing and experiencing spirit all throughout her childhood and has been a medium all her life. She's never had a conventional job. She's been a medium. So there are instances and cases where children retain that sensitivity, that perceptive ability throughout their life. But by and large, most children, it's like the Peter Pan effect, isn't it? By the time they get to kind of 7, they seem to have lost that connection, that perception. It may well be that was a one-off experience, but I would be saying something to the child along the lines of, sorry, was it Steve, did you say? Yeah, that, he's still well, he'll be busy, experiencing this and doing that and doing, whatever, but he's still present. And, to put that suggestion there to them, that we've only got to think about them and expect to be able to feel, may not always see them, but they'll find some way to communicate their presence.
I know we're coming close to
So,
time, but
I'm fine, I haven't got to go anywhere.
I was very, very, very close to my granddad, and he's never ever come. And I struggle with that because I think, well, why hasn't he? Why have I never felt him? Why I was left with a desire? Why has he never, through anybody, ever come? And he's been gone over 50 years. Is that because he's on another vibration doing his own thing and he's not able to be not able to come through any medium for me? Or what would be your explanation for that?
Okay. I can relate my own direct personal experience, which will throw light on this. When my father passed, one of the early communications we had, again from a very trusted and respected medium, actually said that my dad had chosen to remain, as it were, when I say close to the earth, I don't mean physically, but had chosen to remain to be able to maintain kind of contact, close contact. And the implication of that was that, he would have naturally had opportunities to progress and to go on further. And my understanding, and it is just an understanding, that when we find ourselves in the spirit realms, there is a natural progression. Whether you want to call it levels or planes or vibrations, but there is a natural. And my understanding is that as we progress further, it becomes not so easy to be able to express and to communicate back through on the earth plane. Certainly there are other relatives of mine who I was very close to and who I naturally would have expected to hear from and haven't. And my understanding is that, they're kind of, it's not that they don't love me anymore, they don't care for me, but they're kind of so caught up with all the opportunities and the experiences in that life. And it's not that they've forgotten us, I'm sure they are still around, but maybe are able to express in ways that we're just not picking up on. Yeah. Okay.
You go through Estelle Roberts' book about her, written by her guide, Red Cloud. He actually describes it took 7 of our Earth years for him to lower his vibration to be able to communicate with Estelle Roberts, to act as a guide.
I've heard that before, actually.
So, yeah. So he's actually, stating that it's taken 7 years to be able to converse, because it's come back for all that purpose, as being Red Cloud and the guide and the books that are spawned therein. It just goes to show a case of that is the case. Where he was at the beginning of that 7 years, communication wasn't possible.
I guess the other, and I'm not saying this is the explanation, but if I think about, bring it into a sort of personal example, when I find myself in the spirit world, my dad's there, mum's still here at the moment, but all my kind of aunts and uncles and people that I kind of grew up with as a child are all in spirit. The only people kind of left behind at this point are my children and grandchildren, and not wishing my children into the spirit world, but at some point it will be me and the children in spirit world, and the only ones left behind will be the grandchildren, or great grandchildren. That's not to say that my love and my care and my interest has diminished for them, but there's almost a greater bond, almost a greater pull for those who are in the spirit. So that may be part and parcel of that. Yeah, but that's just my personal theory. Yeah. Okay. Do we have a final question?
Any more for any more? Yes, Jay, you've been very quiet.
I'll share with you just one final little anecdote, if that's all right. We've been speaking about children, and we've been speaking about contact, and the fact that the spirit world, when we give them an opportunity, will want to demonstrate that they are around. And I spoke about my grandson, Rafe. He's now 4, but when he was 2.5, I was looking after him one day, and you're not 2.5-year-olds like. They can get a bit kind of stroppy, can't they? And he was sat down with me, and in kind of desperate measures, I whipped out my phone and started scrolling through and was showing him some of the pictures of him when he was a baby, and there's some videos there, and it was kind of distracting him. And what I'd forgotten was that my brother had sent me through a batch of photographs of my dad taken from about 40 years ago. I was scrolling through, and this picture popped up of my dad from 40 years ago. Now, we've only got one photograph in our house of my dad, a kind of a nice one, and it's up on a shelf, and it's out of the eyesight of Rafe, a grandson. And I don't often I haven't talked directly to my grandson about my dad. He wouldn't have understood things at 2.5. So anyway, I was flicking through, this picture came up of my dad, and without thinking, I pointed at the picture and I said to Rafe, at 2.5 years of age, "Who's that?" He said, "Frank." And that was my dad's name. There wasn't a moment's hesitation, but at that, it came out with Frank. Now, you could put any number of possible explanations to that. My belief is that he knew who that was, because he knew my dad before Rafe came into this existence. He remembered him. And it makes perfect sense to me. It makes perfect sense when we view this life in the second model, in that spiritual kind of perspective. Why wouldn't he know my dad? The other alternative explanation was, in that moment, my dad was present, not that I was aware that he was present, and influenced and inspired my grandson to come out with his name. And if that is the case, if Lawrence, if you want to book young Rafe, he's quite cheap at the moment. His expenses are a box of Jaffa cakes, and he'd be quite happy with that.
Oh, we don't share Jaffa cakes.
Yeah. So
David?
Open the door for spirit, and they will step in. Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. David?
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Deserved the church full tonight. That was great. Handouts, props. I mean, what more do you want? Come on. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking this evening. Our next awareness night, the beginning of April, will be taken by Jamie Williamson, and the topic will be philosophy. And then in May, we have a return visit from the man himself tonight to talk about healing. So these awareness nights will just slowly build up different aspects of spiritualism. But I hope you've enjoyed tonight. Fascinating talk. Presentation, 101%. Absolutely bang on. Thank you, David. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for those watching us live tonight, and those who may watch in the future. We hope this is just going to help you understand and just grow. The lady there said a very key word, and thank you for saying that. Education. Education. Yeah, we've got to engage with this movement, this philosophy of and religion of spiritualism. We'd never be passive in our mediumship. We've always got to be active. Why? 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 Keep going up. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.